Hope you all had a good lunch, and those that were at the Fringe enjoyed the Fringe. This is the third of our William Beveridge Memorial Lectures, so it's a fourth of our conference, it's the third of the William Beveridge Memorial Lectures. Previous lecturers have been Mick Clegg and Steve Webb, and we're delighted today to be joined by Tim Farron. My job as chair is to introduce the speaker, which is a very easy task here because actually everybody knows who he is. But in case there is one person in the room who's not quite sure, Tim Farron MP is the MP for Westmoreland and Lonsdale. He is also our party president. He's in the second of his two terms as president, so sadly he leaves us soon as president, but hopefully it's been an enjoyable and stimulating experience with Tim in that role, and we've enjoyed seeing your many TV and listening to your many radio appearances on our behalf. And I think as president you've done us proud. So I want to start off by just saying thank you, Tim. So today's memorial lecture is called Building a New Consensus. Tim informs me the text will be available online, so the Social Liberal Forum will let you know what particular website you need to go to look at the full text of that lecture. If we do have time at the end, we will take some questions, but I won't take up any more of your time. So, Tim Farron, please tell us about building a new consensus.
Okay. Paul, thanks very much, and thank you, all of you. That's a very nice round of applause, but you've not heard what I'm going to say yet. And it is available, it will be available, because for once I've actually written a speech. I thought it would be a good thing to do, an important discipline, and I've enjoyed going through the process last week or so of putting this together. So William Beveridge, of course, never led our country nor our party, but he changed both in a spectacular way. He was a humble man, a good man, and so I'm going to make an assumption that he'd want to know what social liberals plan to do next rather than hear us eulogise about him. It is a massive honour to be asked to give the lecture. I fully count myself as a Beveridge Liberal, mostly because he believed in ambitious government that could improve the lives of its citizens. So I want to use this lecture to say that we should reclaim Beveridge's ambition, his sense of mission of looking beyond what might be deemed possible towards what we believe is necessary. I want to reflect on the Beveridge consensus, which of course was superseded 35 years ago by the Thatcherite consensus. We should shoulder Labour out of the way and fully reclaim the Beveridge consensus as being liberal by its birth, but we should then also seek to reclaim the free market from the Thatcherites. Liberals of every shade should support the free market, but the Thatcherite consensus that has had its hold to an extent on all of Britain's political parties is fundamentally anti-free market. Laissez-faire and the absence of regulation, the privatisation culture in the broadest sense, is a betrayal of the free market. It is the triumph of the oligarch and the monopoly. It is the defeat of the little guy. It's the roadblock to innovation, and it's led, I have to say, to the economic disaster that in government we are trying to fix. So a new consensus will rest in large part on this party being the party of freedom in every sense, including freedom in the marketplace. A new consensus must adopt the spirit of Beveridge and Keynes, and to my mind that spirit is one of ambition, an inspired and inspiring confidence that government can make a difference, that in the face of huge challenges, politics and economics can provide positive solutions to make things better, that government should roll up its sleeves, not wring its hands. Beveridge was clear that we must roll up our sleeves for an express purpose: to slay the 5 giant evils of his age. He identified them as ignorance, want, greed, idleness, squalor and disease. He identified the slayers of those evils too: state education, a welfare state, full employment, decent homes and the National Health Service. Now, can we identify those evils or their descendants in Britain today? Well, maybe we wouldn't use the same language, but what Beveridge called ignorance surely stalks our land still, with millions excluded, reckon 17% of the population, from access to the digital revolution, and so many isolated socially or physically. And let's not pretend that the divide between the schools of the wealthy and the schools of the rest does not constitute an evil that robs millions of the opportunity to reach their potential. Is want dead? Hardly. Inequality goes way beyond education. Millions, young and old, live in poverty, many of them in work, all of them with their freedoms curtailed and often crushed by enslavement to crippling debt. Idleness sounds pejorative, doesn't it? Yet there are 2.5 million people without work, and many more without enough work. A million aged under 25 out of work, but alongside it another evil joins idleness in the workplace: exploitation. People who work on wages so low that they need welfare to bail them out, or a payday lender. Squalor? Well, the slums that may not blight the country now, but the criminal lack of homes, overcrowding, thousands on the street, hundreds of thousands in unfit accommodation, all of these are a squalid stain on society. The diseases we face today are often the diseases of age: cancers, dementia, health needs that follow the course of painful decline in health, and the newly prominent diseases of old age. And at all ages, we increasingly, rightly now, face up to the reality that many millions of lives are blighted by mental illness, predominantly depression. So wasted potential, poverty, exploitation, housing need, mental health. They are not the only evils we face, but they present an enormous challenge for any society that wishes to call itself civilised. It will take more than 40 minutes to fix those challenges. So forgive me if I concentrate on what I say on the areas I've been working on most, on housing and poverty. But let's be clear that none of those current evils can be solved by sticking to the post-79 consensus of passive, neutral, inactive government, and that all of those evils can be beaten by active, ambitious, liberal government. We must decide that we want Britain to end the waste of its best talent through educational inequality, poverty, exploitation, poor housing and poor mental health. And we should design government in order to make it so. You should expect the ambition to change British politics to come from right here. It is no accident that the great strides forward over the last 150 years have been inspired by Liberals: Mill, Gladstone, Hobhouse, Beveridge, Keynes. You should then be unsurprised that the next consensus will have its birth in our party too. Why? Because our party alone is liberated from the shackles of vested interests that stultify and deaden our political opponents, whose very raison d'etre is to suppress innovation and new ways of doing things for fear that those vested interests might lose their preeminence. So if Britain is going to change, then that change is going to start here, and I see every reason why that change should not just start here, but start today. Mill, Gladstone, Hobhouse, Keynes and Beveridge are long gone now, and we know that the historical record of isms, ideologies and idealists are the obsession of the few. If you're in squalid housing, in debt because you can't earn enough to get by, desperate because your kids are in classes of 30 plus and falling further behind, then neither the glorification of Beveridge nor the demonisation of Mrs Thatcher give you one shred of comfort. So let's not wallow in the past, let's stake out a future. One that William Beveridge will be proud of, and one that belongs to us and belongs to now. The post-war consensus of a mixed economy, support for a welfare state and strong public services is one that held sway during the bleakest period in electoral history for the Liberal Party. And yet, ironically, that consensus is one that many Liberals and Social Democrats feel a sense of ownership of. That consensus broke down in the 1970s. It broke down for a variety of reasons, not least that the shared economic policy of Labour and Tory governments since 1945 was deemed to have failed amidst international crises, the breakdown in industrial relations within the UK and inflation of over 12%. The breakdown in consensus was marked by a steep decline in voter loyalty to Labour and the Conservatives. It saw the beginning of electoral strength for the Welsh and Scottish nationalists, for a short time in support for the National Front, but most notably it saw the rise in the Liberal Party, then the Alliance, and ultimately the Liberal Democrats. Up until 1974, 70% of people in classes C, 2, D and E voted Labour, and 80% of people in classes A, B and C1 voted Conservative at pretty much every election. From the elections in 1974 onwards, that began to steadily break down. Whether it's now solidifying into different sets of loyalties is hard to say. It seems to me that tribal politics is still alive and well, but those loyalties are formed by who and what you are against, far more than who and what you are for. The electoral hit that the Liberal Democrats have taken since 2010 seems to be much less about punishing us for the decisions we have made and more about punishing us for the company we have kept. But politics should be about positive plans for a better Britain, not fear and loathing for one tribe or another. We should want the British people to choose the Liberal Democrats for what we are for more than who we are against. So let us stake out a vision of what and who we are for. We should be for active, ambitious, Liberal government. We are not for turning the clock back to pre-Thatcher. We're for saying that Thatcherism's day has been and gone. It failed, just as the state socialism that preceded it failed. The consensus broke down for good reasons, let's not forget that. The 1970s bring back dreadful memories of a weak economy, hopeless state management of that economy, gross inefficiency and poor quality in public services, of rising prices and rising unemployment. Add this to disastrous and paralysing industrial relations and you have a toxic brew. A toxic brew cooked up throughout the 70s, by the way, by both the Conservative government led by Ted Heath and the Labour governments of Harold Wilson and James Callaghan. The end of the consensus came because voters lacked confidence in government as a whole and was coupled with a decline in voters' confidence in their historic parties of choice. That sounds rather familiar. Perhaps the movement from one consensus to another is always set against such a backdrop, in which case we should be even more convinced that this could be our moment. So Margaret Thatcher's election in 1979 was a revolutionary moment. It was the formal breaking of the post-war consensus, and we have much more to learn from her than we might imagine. She was the ultimate insider insurgent. For much of her time in power, she perfected the art of being consummately in power and yet permanently anti-establishment. Her economic solutions were wrong and have had a lasting and damaging impact. Handing control over our major utilities to foreign investors and poorly regulated oligopolies, abdicating responsibility for managing our economy at all, weakening the infrastructure that underpins our economy and weakening and dividing our society. But Margaret Thatcher set herself up as the enemy to the post-war consensus, not just to the unions or to the nationalised industries, but to Whitehall mandarins and their can't-do attitudes, the ultimate small c conservatives, their resistance to radical solutions and their apparent enjoyment of the Butzke-like passing of the parcel between indistinguishable Labour and Conservative governments. She challenged traditional patrician conservatism too, and was as much loathed by the Knights of the Shires as she was by the Union barons. She didn't just rightly end the illiberal union clothes shop. She, for a while at least, ended the clothes shop for the old Etonian Oxbridge elite, and we should admire her for both. And let's not overlook the fact that Mrs. Thatcher succeeded in establishing a second post-war consensus. A consensus in favour of unregulated markets, of an unambitious, can't-do state, of hands-off government. It was a consensus across the political divide. Labour resisted at first, but then bought it hook, line and sinker. Back in the 40s and 50s, of course, it took a few years for the Tories to accept the Beveridge consensus, and similarly, it took Labour a decade to accept the Thatcher consensus, but accept it they did. Labour's decision to buy into Thatcherite economics when it removed the restraints on the banking sector in 1997 is arguably the point at which the financial disaster in 2008 became inevitable. It's a consensus that Liberal Democrats, to our huge credit, have largely refused to buy into. But in our 4 years in government, under the immense pressure of the financial crisis, we have not been able to take advantage of an opportunity to subvert it. And of course we won't subvert it if we make the mistake of thinking that our party's future lies in the area of laissez-faire economics. It is good that my friend Jeremy Brown so you know where I'm going. It's good that my friend, a very good friend and former university activist comrade Jeremy Brown, has challenged the party with his new book, Race Plan. Liberals should never be afraid of debate. We are indeed a broad church. I do not want to excommunicate Jeremy. I wish to convert him. And actually, Jeremy's position is intellectually coherent and honourable. I just don't think he's right. We should not accept that passive, neutral government creates a strong liberal framework. Of course it doesn't. Small government means weak citizens. We want citizens to be free to choose to live their lives as they wish, and free from the threats, forces and impediments that will prevent them doing so. Freedoms to, freedoms from. Never mind economic liberalism versus social liberalism. It's time to stake out the case for comprehensive liberalism, based on a true understanding of what creates and what prevents freedom. Laws that prevent you worshipping as you choose, living with whom you choose, reading what you choose, curtail your liberties no more and no less than the poverty, the ill health and the inadequate education that robs you of your choices. I demand that liberals should defend our citizens from all of these threats. There is no political market for a centre-right, laissez-faire Liberal Party amongst the British electorate, or for a party that sets itself up and no market for a party that sets itself up as a kind of permanent seesaw coalition partner. To aim to be either would be to neuter our movement and invite electoral annihilation, on the same scale as our dear friends in the German Free Democrats who chose a similar path. To follow the FDP example would be to abdicate responsibility for our economy. Just when our economy needs vision and leadership, we will be offering to give it none. The same as our political opponents. There is no future in this. It is not our future. It is not even liberalism. My argument is that the post-1979 consensus should now be considered dead. It does not need an FDP-style rebrand. It needs a decent burial. We are Beveridge liberals not because we think that the clock should be turned back to pre-1979, but because we share the values of the architects of that earlier consensus. Not just Beveridge, but Keynes too. Neither of those two were dogmatists. They were not concerned about what the apparatus of the state must look like, big or small. Instead, they were interested in the end results, the well-being of all citizens. Keynes promoted the notion of interventionist economics, that governments had both the responsibility and the ability to affect their economies to benefit their citizens, principally by increasing demand by public spending in order to create economic activity to create jobs. Keynes was seen as the counterpoint to laissez-faire economics on the one hand and Marxist economics on the other. An economic pragmatist whose motives were a genuine concern for the welfare and standard of life of all citizens, but especially those who were the poorest. And Beveridge, well, arguably, Beveridge changed everything. He took his opportunity, and he did it in impossible circumstances. Beveridge was an MP for one single year, hounded out of Parliament by a BMA-sponsored campaign in his Berwick constituency because he had proposed something called the National Health Service. Beveridge was a member of the smallest minor party in a coalition government. The country faced the existential crisis to end them all as war raged across Europe, and yet against this backdrop, Beveridge had the audacity to think the biggest and best of ideas and make them happen. And he also did this against the backdrop of the tightest fiscal contraction this country had ever seen. That is a lesson for us today as we seek to build a new consensus. If we want to recast and revitalise Britain, then we must understand the need to be wise and disciplined in our spending on revenue, but utterly devoid of timidity when it comes to capital investment. Labour's approach appears to be the opposite. Despite the deficit, they are incapable of making tough decisions to rein in public revenue spending, and equally incapable of making the tough and far-sighted decisions to invest, to expand our infrastructure, to build the Britain of the future. Let's not get too misty-eyed about the first post-war consensus, because it became adulterated. It detached from the principles that underpinned it. Why? Well, because it was conceived by liberals, it was enacted and managed by those who were not liberals. But the fundamentals behind the liberal consensus were a concern for our fellow citizens and an ambition that we could turn that concern into something real that liberated them in every sense. And that is the critical difference between the consensus triggered by Beveridge and the consensus triggered by Mrs. Thatcher. Beveridge's consensus was ambitious. The consensus of Thatcher, Major, Blair, Brown and Cameron is unambitious. It says that government cannot make the difference. It says that all we can do to help business is to back out, that all that business needs is the free-for-all of Beecroft, that all our economy needs is another inflated southeast housing boom, that all our infrastructure needs will be met by unaccountable monopolies doing it in their own good time. That consensus has failed utterly. The Beveridge consensus is a liberal legacy, not just because Beveridge was a liberal, but because its motivations were liberal. Its ultimate demise was due to the fact that those who took ownership of the consensus were simply not liberals. Dare I say that Labour's embracing of that consensus owed most to the fact that large welfare state and public sectors pander to their inbuilt tendency to want to control people, and that the Conservative support for that consensus owed most to the Tory patrician tendency to want to sedate an otherwise restless proletariat. Political ideologies that are on their way out tend to mark their demise with unmistakable events. Communism in Eastern Europe died at the fall of the Berlin Wall. The post-war consensus died at the winter of discontent in 78-79. The Thatcher-Reagan economic experiment surely should have died at the collapse of the banks in 2008, yet somehow that corpse is still twitching. The financial crisis was the clear physical proof that the economic experiment that supplanted Beveridge, the Beveridge consensus, had been a disastrous, inhuman flop. But don't misunderstand me. The Thatcherite consensus that Cameron sustains and Miliband has no answer to has been demonstrated to have failed not just in the crash of 2008 and the poverty, misery and inequality it has inflicted, but also in the absence of so much of the infrastructure we need to plan for the future. Let's just be honest and acknowledge that we still have pathetic rail links, a massive housing shortage, a massive skills shortage, laughable broadband connectivity, an appalling energy crisis and the ultimate crisis of climate change. The Thatcherite consensus has damaged our society and it has weakened our economy. Conservatives have often talked about their admiration of Victorian values, if only they really did admire those values, because Victorian values included an ambition to build an infrastructure, to create a transport, communications and logistics backbone to our economy, and to make a difference, to see a problem and not worry about whether fixing it would fit with your ideology, but just to get on and fix it. There is no point lamenting that the past was better. That is UKIP's job. There have been so many deliberately missed opportunities, but we are where we are. What matters now is that we must be clear that a new consensus is about much more than putting healing balm on our country's wounds. It is also about rebuilding and strengthening us for the long term. So our new consensus must be based on a belief in active, can-do government whose focus is tackling the biggest challenges we face in the confident belief that we can overcome them. Housing need may just be the greatest of the evils that we face. The atrophy of our social housing stock over the last 30 years, the staggering rise in house prices in the last 20 years, the burgeoning class of people who own more than one home, and the failure of supply to meet demand means that Britain is in the midst of a deepening housing crisis. If bread had risen by the same proportion as housing costs since 1980, a loaf would today cost you £8.50. The average deposit for a first-time buyer in the early 80s was 12% of their annual income. The average deposit for a first-time buyer today is 83% of their annual income. So while 1.6 million privileged people and rising have a second home, the number in need of a first home is growing by the week. Getting on for 3 million adults under 35 now live with their parents, and that will rise by a quarter by the end of this decade. This means that as I speak, there are across the country families living in damp, unsafe, overcrowded, expensive hovels, people on reasonable salaries in London priced out, businesses robbed of a workforce because of a lack of decent housing for working age people. To solve this problem will take more than a few tweaks in planning. It will mean making a choice, choosing to build 3 million homes in 10 years, because nothing less will solve the problem. We should make that choice. Our choice should be to embark on the largest social housing building programme since the 1950s, to create fresh places, new communities, homes fit for families and the future. We don't have to do this, of course. There is an alternative, but it is to permit the deepening and widening of human misery, to rob another generation of its potential, to limit our citizens and to hold back the economic growth that a mass building programme would bring. It is an alternative that the other parties, by their inaction appear to have chosen, but it is an unacceptable choice, an appalling alternative. So let's build 3 million homes. Over the last year, I've been working with the Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust and joining others in developing solutions to this crisis. And talking with the experts, I've heard a lot about why the previous administrations failed to build homes. Some say it's planning, others finance, others land prices, availability or infrastructure. Others say politicians showing a lack of leadership. The truth is it is all of these and more. One thing for sure is that when you are faced with a giant evil like our housing crisis, you need a decent plan. The plan should be to include at least 5 new garden cities designed and built by the brightest minds, but not just garden cities, also fresh places of anything from 1,000 homes upwards. Any community big enough to support a primary school is big enough. And the plan should be underpinned by a housing investment bank to draw in private investment, simplify public investment and support innovation. There can be no progress without immediate and bold action to increase the transparency of our broken land market. A tax system that flushes out land and makes it affordable. We can't let vested interests continue to block that reform. Chomping at the bit to build at this very moment are the housing associations and the local authorities. Lift the cap on borrowing then for both of them and let housing associations build mixed settlements to cross-subsidise. Give them full access to the full range of government finance guarantees and let them off the leash. And while we're at it, councils must have the right to suspend the right to buy so that we don't lose with one hand what we gain with the other. To build fresh places needs also the training of fresh people. There must be an immediate launch of a large-scale training and apprenticeships programme to meet the skills shortage to get the job done. All of this takes leadership. It's going to upset some people. We must respect those people, and we must do it anyway. We need to face up to the fact that opposing new homes can be the politically easy thing to do, but the supporting them will normally be the right thing. At the heart of this must be a recognition that housing has got too important to leave to a broken market. That means that government investment needs to underpin a new generation of homes that reflect the diversity of need, social rented, shared ownership, shared equity, homes where every rent payment goes towards owning the home, fresh places with an ageing population cared for, and young people given a chance. A worthwhile political consensus does not come about in a consensual manner. They may have established a consensus, but neither Beveridge nor Thatcher were consensual figures. They were driven, unreasonable, determined, uncompromising. Our new consensus will need to be fought for and won. We will achieve that consensus by winning arguments and democratically defeating those people who disagree with us. Be encouraged, because the demographics show that there is an incoming tide of support. Remember, the generation of citizens who've been locked out of stable housing, unable to buy, ranges up to people well into their 40s now. People who didn't get the chance to buy before the 97 boom weren't, and who are not wealthy or clients of the banks of mum and dad are, to use the technical term, stuffed when it comes to buying a home. More than half the working age population are now in the age group that has been excluded. Politicians have shamefully ignored the plight of those people because by definition they are younger, more transient and less likely to vote. Whereas the sections of society whose housing situation is comfortable and who see no need for action are also by definition older, less transient and much more likely to vote. But with the passage of time, this is no longer the case. The disenfranchised demographic, the excluded millions, includes many who are my age now and who are middle class, vocal, locked out and angry. They and their parents and their families are looking for a party that understands their anger and is uncompromising in providing a bold solution. They are the shock troops of a new consensus and they are ours if we want them, so let's want them. Here's something not a lot of people know. The Lib Dems have ensured the first net growth in social rented housing for almost 40 years. It's not even remotely enough, but it is a significant turnaround. Anyone who thinks the Tories would have done this without us probably needs to sober up. We need to be quite a bit prouder and more resolute in the defence of those things we have done in this last 4 years. Something else that wouldn't have happened without the Liberal Democrats is HS2. Now, I'm an unequivocal supporter of HS2. It will be worth every penny of the 50 billion we're going to spend on it. But the official reason given by the government for this project is the wrong one. We are told that HS2 is all about faster journey times. That is not the issue, to be honest. The killer argument in favour of HS2 is that it massively increases capacity. The train journeys between north and south are reasonably quick. It takes just 2 hours, or 2.5 hours rather, to get me from the Lake District to Euston. The problem, though, is capacity. We've spent £10 billion in the last few years in upgrading just the West Coast main line, and it's full again. HS2 provides the answer, and it unlocks greater potential from the Midlands and the north of England. The alternative to HS2, or the alternative to building HS2, will be to build hundreds and hundreds of miles of additional motorways, at much greater cost financially and to our environment, with fewer benefits to our economy. So HS2 is right, but on its own, it is one-dimensional and a little bit patronising, as if all we Northerners needed to achieve fulfilment and meaning and economic growth is to be able to get to London a little bit quicker. The London's housing problem is genuine cost of living crisis, the immense strain on public services in the capital, and the social problems and economic underachievement that blight too much of the rest of the UK are all linked together. Britain's biggest problem, and the key to slaying most of those giant evils, is that London matters far too much for Britain's good and for its own good. So while the right argument for HS2 is about capacity, not speed, the arguments for HS 3, 4, 5 and 6, and you can keep going, is about speed. It is about speed. A high-speed link between Hull and Liverpool, through Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, from the West Country, from East Anglia to the Midlands, from Wales to the Midlands, and the North, from Carlisle to Newcastle, connecting our great towns and cities to one another, connecting East and West as quickly and as seamlessly as we connect North and South. That is where our focus must be, and we must start right away. The wasted potential of the United Kingdom outside London is our greatest threat and our greatest opportunity. That our largest city is 7 times larger than our second largest city is utterly crazy. City deals and greater devolution to cities, shires and regions of England, of course, is right. As Liberals, we should be passionate about doing that. But how passionate can we really be about devolving power if we're not also spreading and sharing wealth and investment? We must use the talents of all of our people, and we must exploit the potential of all of our places. Moving government departments from out of London to other cities does no harm. Indeed, it does some good, but it is not transformational. Building an ambitious infrastructure to make every part of Britain matter to business and to the wider economy, that is transformational. Let's also stop fixating on London and the South East as a place to build extra airport capacity. That capacity no doubt should be provided, but it should be provided elsewhere in the United Kingdom. And it's not just about transport communications either. Parts of my constituency are still on dial-up to get on the internet. Most of my constituents count themselves lucky if they get 2 megabits per second download speed. And if they're in business, that means they've got to cope with upload speeds that are a fraction of that. This problem is not restricted to the Lake District. It affects large parts of London and other urban areas too. I noticed the local MP, I assume for here, Shoreditch anyway, the other week, complaining that many of her constituents have less than 2 megabits per second of download speed connectivity. Last time I checked, which was just about half an hour ago, this is pretty urban around here. So connectivity across our country is substandard and patchy, and that is a massive problem. Because people do not need to crowd into or near to the capital and rent or buy at exorbitant prices, struggle to get their kids into a decent school, struggle to get by on what looks like a decent salary but isn't in reality given the cost of living there. They don't need to do all that if instead they can make a good living in Yeovil, Norwich or Preston. And the key to that is broadband. World-class broadband gives businesses and families the capacity and the option to locate where they choose, to have quality of life, quality of location. The fastest connection speed in Europe, average speeds, are in Lithuania, with speeds of about 37 megabits per second, twice the average in the United Kingdom. Of course, the Lithuanian government still part owns their telecommunications industry. They identified the problem, the solution and the resource, they clicked their fingers and they made it so. That has not happened here, and it is holding us back. Beveridge would have no time for excuses. He'd just get this fixed, and we should be the same. Now, I have no desire to reopen the stale arguments over privatisation and nationalisation, but I have a strong desire to open up new arguments about control. I want government to be able to get things done. It has always bemused me that you get some Conservative politicians who've been really successful in their business careers, admirably so, and have been successful because they've led their firms in an effective way with a level of command and control, and then they get into politics and seek to break all the levers that they could have used in order to be effective on behalf of the country by selling things off and deregulating. But there is nothing socialist about wanting government to be effective. So maybe it was right to sell off BT, but it was immensely damaging for the government to throw away any ability to manage the network. So let's not renationalise BT, let's do something cheaper and better. Let's pass an Act of Parliament to create a universal service obligation of 100 megabits per second by 2020 on every property in the United Kingdom. South Korea's stunning, world-beating leap towards 1,000 megabits per second, a gigabit per second, in 2017, is built on the creation of a universal service obligation. That's the home of the free market, by the way. So let's not wait for the unfree market to move at a snail's pace towards a solution that will only end up being inadequate anyway. Let's instead make it so. Let's connect the country properly. Britain's greatness was built on the Royal Mail and the railways. Let's do it today with fibre optic cables. Can-do, ambitious government. It is vital that we have renewed housing and infrastructure and stop wasting the potential of the places outside London. And it's vital that we also stop wasting the potential of our people in every part of the country. Beveridge identified idleness and want as two of his giant evils and named full employment and the welfare state as their answers. Now, idleness sounds judgmental, doesn't it? And I don't think he meant it like that. He simply identified the fact that millions of capable people were out of work, and that was a waste of resources as well as being simply inhuman. And that's how it struck me. I hear a lot of commentators writing piously about the 1980s. Well, like many of you, I had a front row seat on the 1980s. My sister and I were raised by our mum in a terraced house in Lancashire. No heatings, no holidays, and my mum out of work from time to time, and half my mates, their parents, pretty much out of work all of the time. And the thing that struck me most of all when I saw the absence of work and the absence of hope was what a waste. What a waste of wonderful people. So yes, I have a bleeding heart, but I also have a level head. And when I see this country failing to make best use of the potential of our greatest resource, our people, then I say that this is not just morally abhorrent, but also utterly stupid. Now, I owe my mum a lot. It's 10 years since she passed away, far too young at 54 after a fight with ovarian cancer. And amongst the things I owe her is the fact that those years were, in fact, immensely happy. One of the marks of an excellent parent is that when your children only realise in hindsight that they've grown up in poverty. And when you look back the years after you've grown up and you didn't realise that at all until you did. So it didn't feel like I grew up in poverty, and it didn't feel like I had my opportunities curtailed, essentially because of my mum's dignity, self-respect and aspirations to escape those hard times. But for lots of people I knew, that was the case. Their background defined and dictated their futures. Many of my mates identified fully with the no future nihilism of Johnny Rotten. That is, if they thought about it at all. So many of them just accepted their lot. Looking at it from my experience and background, I am angered by the appalling rhetoric of Miliband and Osborne setting the shirkers against the strivers, talking about those whose curtains are closed as their neighbours leave the house to go to work, consumed by bitterness. A new consensus must be built around full employment, but not about setting the working poor against the workless poor for short-term political gain. And we must rejoice in being a country that is committed and uncomplaining about supporting those who cannot work. When the Samaritan crossed the road to help the Jewish man, he didn't make a judgment as to whether this guy was deserving or not. He identified his need, and out of compassion and duty, he met those needs. Those are British values, and we should be proud of them. They must be integral to our new consensus. We must use the talent of everyone in Britain, which doesn't mean that no one will ever fail. What is unacceptable is that so many people seem destined to fail. And we all know that people's destinies are so often settled before their lives even begin. That your background dictates the limits of your opportunities is an outrage, but a crushing reality. Again, let's clarify the source of our outrage. We are angry that poverty, poor housing, limited education locks out millions. We are angry because it is unfair, it's morally wrong, but our anger is hard-headed as well as soft-hearted. Poverty and the lack of opportunity is the squandering of our human resource. When we invest in beating poverty, we build the backbone of an economic renaissance. You will hear ministers on both sides of the coalition saying that work is the best route out of poverty, and they are dead right, or at least they would be if working for a living gave you enough to actually get you out of poverty. But for millions it doesn't. Families with children where at least one parent works have now become the largest group experiencing poverty in the United Kingdom. What a disgrace. So a living wage must be central to stopping the scourge of in-work poverty. We must set a target for every breadwinner to be paid a living wage by 2020. Labour and the Tories are too timid to say this because, let's be honest, there are many good reasons to be equivocal. It's just that those reasons are not as strong as the reasons to take that bold step. We should take the lead knowing that this is achievable because we have to defeat real poverty. Not just the definition dreamt up by the government of the day. Labour in government focused too much on just shifting the very poorest beyond an arbitrary baseline and hailing this as the defeat of poverty. What a load of rot. Massaging statistics through ESA payments and tax credits is not an ambitious strategy for defeating poverty. It achieved nothing except locking more people into dependency through allowing and at the same time allowing the Islington chattering classes feel a little bit less guilty, while poverty still stalked the land wearing a new Labour disguise. Labour's sophistry was not just dishonest, it was expensive too. A living wage will render so much of that unnecessary, giving the government the wherewithal to help employers with tax exemptions to help them afford the wage rises. 18 million people cannot afford adequate housing. 12 million people are too poor to engage in common social activities. 1 in 3 people cannot afford to heat their homes adequately in winter. And 4 million children and adults are not properly fed by today's standards. I am ashamed of that. Complacency, acquiescence and self-righteous anger matched with no action makes us utterly culpable. No wringing hands, time to roll up sleeves. We have more low-paying, low-skilled jobs than most countries in the developed world. When UKIP and the Tories complain about broken Britain, we must reply that it is broken, just not in the way that they think. And it is broken because of their lazy, laissez-faire, apathetic economics, which allowed us to drift into this dismal situation. Low-paid, low-skilled work holds back UK productivity. Our productivity is behind most developed countries as well. It's not immigration or Europe that holds us back. In fact, they help us. What holds us back is decades now of unambitious, can't-do government. Let's call an end to it. If you are pro-business, you must be actively anti-poverty. If you ran a company that only made use of 20% of your staff and 20% of your premises, you would be an unsuccessful fool. But that is Britain. While we focus on London and the South East and underutilise the rest of Britain, while we pour opportunity upon opportunity on a minority of people who live in the right place, went to the right schools, have the right parents, and restrict opportunities in varying degrees to everyone else, we prevent Britain being all that it could be. Liberals invented our welfare state, our health service, and the notion of active government because we saw and we see that ignorance, idleness, squalor, want and disease are indeed evils. And that they are not just evils per se, but they are evils because they rob people of their ability to meet their potential. So we must build the homes we need, create the infrastructure to unleash the wasted potential of our country, and end poverty to unleash the wasted potential of our people. But the new consensus will be worthless if it is not underpinned by radical action to tackle climate change. Climate change is the existential threat. Climate change deserves a lot more attention than I can give it in this lecture, but I want to be clear that our economy, security, all our hopes and dreams rest on whether we will together fight climate change and whether we will win that fight. Today, around 2,000 babies will be born up and down the United Kingdom, and by the time they reach old age, they could see global temperatures rise by 7 degrees. In their lifetimes, we will see whole nations displaced, farmland deluged, industry devastated. The challenge is massive, And the answer's not quite as simple as we'd like. But surely the overriding answer is to think big and to act fast. Let's consider the potential we are wasting, especially in tidal and hydro energy. We live on an island with more tidal estuaries than you can count, and 95% of the hydro energy supply chain at the moment is British. But tidal, solar, wind, energy efficiency projects, they all play a part, but large-scale civil engineering strikes me as being the best way of tackling our large-scale environmental crisis. And we need to keep winning the argument. It would be marvellously convenient if either climate change wasn't happening, or it didn't matter, or it was unstoppable, so convenient that even reasonably sensible people are easily suckered into inaction, if not downright denial, and just get on with their lives. A new consensus must be established that climate change is the greatest physical threat that we face. We must humanise the consequences, stop talking to each other in technical terms, but terrifying the living daylights out of people with the truth. Climate change's horrendous impact on your home, your family, your community, your income, your security are less than a generation away. There is nothing esoteric about the human misery that is coming our way if we do not act. The forced mass movement of hundreds of millions of people, the famine, the industrial collapse, the violent conflicts over ever more precious land. If we do not win the argument, we will not win the right to overcome this challenge with the action we all know is needed. And the action we need? Well, the unregulated market will not achieve it. A market freed from the dead hand of uninspired, complacent monopoly can. A market that responds to government-led investment through a hugely expanded green investment bank can. So, there have been two consensuses since the war. We should boldly proclaim the start of the third. The Thatcherite consensus keeps breathing because for a failed idea to truly die, there needs to be something new to replace it. So let's be as audacious as Thatcher, as audacious as Beveridge. Let's step into the void and make Liberal Democrats the new visionaries. Let's build a new consensus. Of course, consensus is all about consent. Not that all the political parties consent, but that the people consent. So we must win the consent of the voters for a government that is active, ambitious and liberal, and consent to the notion that taxation is the subscription charge you pay for living in a civilised society, that there is zero tolerance, socially or legally, for cheating the community by not paying your subscription charge in full. Now, government is about leadership, about making a difference, not abdication. I'm fed up of us seeing us fail to meet our potential, to take the lead, to innovate, to be the best, because governments continue to buy the lie that the job of government is to get out of the way. Who gets involved in politics to sit and watch the weather? Let's make the weather. Social liberal, economic liberal axis, it's flawed. We must be both. We must be comprehensive liberals. Let's say no to passive, neutral government that allows the evils of our day to grow unchecked. Let's say no to authoritarian, intrusive government that becomes an evil in itself by subjugating its citizens. Instead, let's say a huge yes to active, ambitious, liberal government. We are Beveridge liberals because, like him, we have the audacity to believe that government is for making things better, not for watching things fail. I love winning elections, right? Not because I want to hold office, but because I want to make a difference. We have been unselfish as a party this last 4 and a bit years, putting the country's needs ahead of our own. But the time has come to be selfish, because it is in Britain's interests that the Liberal Democrats survive and then thrive, and then lead and build a new consensus for a can-do government that will end the waste of most of Britain's people and most of Britain's places. So when you are digging in for dear life to defend our council and parliamentary seats this next 9 or 10 months, just remember what it is you are defending. You are defending the future. You are defending a dream of a better, stronger, fairer, greener, more decent Britain. You are defending the legacy of Beveridge and the chance to make history again, to slay the giant evils, to build a new consensus. Thank you.